Our next presentation is going to be co-presented by Gwen Yoshimura and Gail Swigert. And we introduced Gwen yesterday. She presented yesterday morning, so I'll limit the introduction today to Gail. Gail Swigert is the manager of the Air Quality Analysis section from the California Air Resources Board. In this capacity, she oversees the development of the monitoring network plans and data certification, as well as managing technical staff that conduct the comprehensive evaluation of the California air quality and attainment challenges. She works directly with the air districts and the U.S. EPA on implementing new monitoring requirements, as well as ongoing evaluation of monitoring siting issues. Most recently, she's included coordination with the deployment of new near-road monitoring work. She is also responsible for development of the federal air quality plans, as well as ARB's Almanac of Emissions and Air Quality. She's been with the Air Resources Board for 20 years and has worked in a number of different programs, including air quality planning, monitoring, and mobile source control. Gail has a Bachelor's of Science degree in environmental toxicology. And today's presentation is entitled, What to Do When Making Changes to Your Network.
Thank you. Today I'll be talking about some of the practical implications that you need to consider when you make a change to your monitoring site or you're contemplating making a change to your monitoring site. And I'm going to be tag teaming with Gwen on this presentation. So we're going to cover three main things. The importance of communication as early in the process when you're contemplating a change, some of the problems that we've encountered in the ARB PQAO and how to avoid them, and then the approval process for the changes that need approval. So my number one takeaway message is work with your friendly folks at ARB and the US EPA Region 9. We're here to help you. Contact us as early as possible as you can, because we want to make things work for you, and we want to streamline the process where we can and then help you avoid any problems. Okay, so why is notification so important? I'm going to be building on the themes that you heard yesterday about documentation, requirements in the CFR, network plans. It's because one little change of one instrument at your site can impact whether your district or neighboring districts meets monitoring requirements, whether the entire ARB PQAO will meet colocation requirements, and it could impact your lab's ability to support your new particulate monitor. And you also need to consider whether the ARB audit and QA team has the resources to audit and support your equipment. And finally, your data is so important. It's submitted in a number of databases and network plans. So there's a really important need to let everybody who's going to have their hands on your data to notify them. Okay, changes impact so many data sources that you may not realize. Your data, for most part, is going into the real-time air quality databases, ARB's ACMIS-2, US EPA's Air Now, and it's often used to calculate and predict the air quality index, which is a key way that the public really understands how air quality from a day-to-day basis, how healthful it is. In addition, your data will eventually go into EPA's regulatory database, AQS. So the person who in your district or at ARB who's responsible for submitting that data needs to know about all of your network changes so we can make the appropriate changes in AQS. And finally, we've heard a lot about network plans. All these changes are going to have to be reflected in your district's network plans. I just want to highlight a few examples of problems that we've recently encountered in the PQAO so that you can keep these in mind as you're contemplating your change at your monitoring site. When you're contemplating, I'd like to walk you through just changing one instrument. If you change to an instrument that is really unique to the PQAO that no other district has, you really need to coordinate with us to make sure that the ARB audit team actually has the equipment to audit the instrument. We have one example in the PQAO right now where there's a new instrument and we don't have the equipment to audit it, and it really affects the usability of your data. Because if your data can't be audited, it's not considered data for record, it can't be certified, and it really can't be used in regulatory actions, such as an attainment finding. And that, for some districts who are very close to standards, that's a very critical concern. And the second is any changes of particulate matter instruments, they really affect colocation, and that affects ARB and all the 32 districts in the ARB PQAO. There's a lot of movement now from FRMs to FEMs and from multiple districts, and we really need to sit down with you and evaluate what are the colocation impacts and how can we develop kind of a plan to address them. And finally, I think it's important to be able to avoid any instruments that have poor instrument performance. So kind of reaching out and communicating early in the process will help you avoid that. Now, there's a whole breadth of changes that we're talking about, from adding a new instrument or switching an instrument to more larger changes, such as a station relocation, shutting down a station, or establishing a new station. And based on the types of changes, the processes or the approval process really varies. So this slide kind of breaks down the types of changes into two categories. Those that don't require formal approval, such as you have your monitoring site configuration and you just want to move a monitor within a current site. You do not have to have official approval for that. Or you want to change an instrument such as an FRM to an FEM. For the most part, those don't require approval. But they do require you to kind of communicate with us, just as I mentioned, because it's so important that all the information gets reflected in the correct places. But there are some changes that do require formal approval, and we want to work with you to streamline it as much as we can. And that includes initiating a new site or monitor, moving, relocating a site or monitor, or shutting down a monitoring site or instrument. And they all have unique challenges. Our preferred notification process for both ARB and EPA is to informally meet with us to discuss anticipated changes. Generally, how it works is if you contact us, we'll work with Monitoring and Laboratory Division and kind of get the right people together and have a short call and really discuss and evaluate the potential impacts and what the best path forward will be for you. For those changes that require approval, again, station or instrument shutdowns, relocations, or new sites, you need to kind of work with us, develop a plan, and submit a formal request for site modifications, receive approval from US EPA, and then implement the change. And there's a lot of timing on those processes that is really important. For instrument changes, basically what we want you to do is just work with us to evaluate the colocation impacts. That's the number one issue that's kind of facing the ARB PQAO right now, is making sure that we can meet colocation requirements for all the different PM10 and PM2.5 method types. Determine where the changes need to be documented. They'll have to show up in your network plans and in different databases. Identify instrument performance issues. And one of the important decisions you'll make is if your monitor is going to be a SLAMS or a special purpose monitor. We tend to recommend that if you're not sure you want to have a long-term monitor, you start out as a special purpose monitor. You have more flexibility within the first 2 years of making changes, shutting the monitor down, or relocating it without approvals. New station. The preferred process is to let us know as early as possible. Determine the type of monitor you want again. EPA approval's needed, but generally this can be done as part of your annual network plan and is the preferred process that EPA likes to see. And you'll be getting a lot more information in the upcoming presentations on setting up a new station. Typical reasons for site shutdowns. Okay, we've had issues of like safety, dinosaur crossing area, or where buildings become extremely unsafe for you to access for the monitoring equipment. Of course, we've heard about the trees growing. Or you can just lose your lease, which is becoming a really common kind of problem we're dealing with recently. And you, the operator, may see that we're no longer meeting monitoring objectives. There may be changes that have occurred at the site, or the planning folks may see that this is no longer the high site. It's no longer really a good measure of population exposure or transport. There's a number of reasons to shut a site down. And probably what's really driving us lately is, EPA's been busy adopting new standards. Each standard has new monitoring requirements. We're seeing near road, new SO2, new lead monitoring requirements. And, resources just necessitate reallocation to higher priority monitoring needs. And I think that's going to be a big issue that will probably be looked at next year when the network assessments are done. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Gwen to kind of walk you through some of the details of what does the CFR say you have to do, and why are we asking for some of this documentation for network changes and in network plans?
Hello again. Good morning. Thanks all for coming back again for day 2. Thanks, Gail, for that nice introduction. So Gail has walked you through a number of reasons why you might want to shut down a site. I'm here as the EPA person to walk through some of the Code of Federal Regulations requirements to do so. You're like, she's doing that again. So, to qualify for a site shutdown, the Code of Federal Regulations says that EPA actually needs to approve that, and there's a number of criterion that you need to meet and able to shut down a monitor. You need to be able to show that your area, after you shut down the site or monitor, will continue to meet Appendix D minimum monitoring requirements, which are those requirements that Eric so nicely walked us through yesterday. You also need to show that the area will continue to meet any SIP requirements. Sometimes state implementation plans will say that they will monitor progress by using monitoring. So sometimes those plans actually specify that those monitors need to stay there. So in those cases, you can't shut down those monitors. And then as a note, you don't want to be shutting down any of your design value monitors. And again, your design value monitors being the monitors that are the highest in your area. This was sort of touched on, I think, yesterday. Karen Magliano kind of spoke to it. So if you think of a situation, maybe your area is non-attainment or, not meeting a certain standard, and you have your highest monitor in your area. You lose your lease, so you shut down that monitor. And then let's say 2 years down the road, all of your remaining monitors are showing attainment of the standard. So you come to EPA and you say, we're showing attainment, redesignate us to attainment. And we say, how do you know for sure that that area that used to have your highest concentration is actually attaining? You don't have that monitor anymore. So it creates a lot of challenges. So it's not something that we want to see. Regardless of whether it's a SLAMS or an SPM, you don't want to shut down your design value site. So in addition to these broad requirements, and there's also actually 6 criteria listed in 40 CFR 58 Part 14. And you can look up those 6 if you're particularly interested using ARB's nifty website. But the one that we see that is most commonly used is C1, the first one. And that one requires that you be able to show that your monitor has been attaining the standard for 5 years, and that it has a design value probability of less than 10% of exceeding 80% of the standard. That last statistic is not intuitively understandable, so we actually made a table to just automatically calculate this. So just to give you an example, it's a little bit hard to see, I expect, on the screen, but basically this is presenting an example for PM 2.5 if you wanted to shut down a PM 2.5 monitor. A good thing to note is that since PM 2.5 has 2 standards, you need to run it for both of your standards, right? So that would be the case for any pollutant that has more than one type of standard. So on the chart, it shows the tests being run for the 24-hour PM 2.5 NACs, and then the bottom part shows the annual PM 2.5 NACs. So basically, the inputs that you need are your 5 design values. And then it just runs the statistics, and it says whether or not you pass or you fail. So it's actually fairly straightforward. But the key thing is you have to have those 5 design values, right? So if you're thinking about design values and you need 3 years of data to calculate one design value, how many years of data do you actually need for 5 design values? No, that's what I thought too, but actually it's 7, right? You have your 5 design values, and then to add up to your first one, you need 3 years. So it's 7 years of data. So it's quite a lot, right? If you miss completeness for any of those 7 years, really you can't run this test. So again, completeness, having good site operation is very critical. Okay. So that's well and good. What if you want to do a site relocation? Well, actually, so it's often more work to do a site relocation. If you think about it, that C1 criterion is often pretty easy to meet. You just say, I will continue to meet minimum monitoring requirements. This monitor is not required by SIP. I run my statistic and I pass, and I have 5 years of attainment, right? And then you give that to EPA, and we say, excellent, great, you can shut down your monitor. It's fairly straightforward. But if you want to do a relocation, you have to be able to show that your old site and your new site are representing the same type of air and the same types of concentrations. So your new site actually needs to you need to be able to say of your new site that it's representing sort of the same levels of concentrations or higher levels, if that happens to be the case. So you want to pursue relocation if you want to make sure that you have a continuous data record. So in our previous example, where you got kicked out of your site where you had your high design value site, it would be a good opportunity to pursue a site relocation, right? So that way you find your new site, you shut down your old one, you bring up your new one, and you have a continuous data record without any data gaps. To be able to do that, though, you need to be able to have an assessment of comparability between your old site and your new site. So sometimes that'll require parallel monitoring. And it, of course, requires approval by EPA and ARB. So again, as Gail mentioned, if you're faced with this type of situation, or if you're just contemplating a shutdown, definitely just tag us, and we can talk through whether or not a relocation is appropriate, or if you can just move forward with a shutdown and maybe open up a new site. So here's a nice graphic showing, you're moving from your old site to your new site. The type of information that we like to see are pictures. We like pictures. The distances from your old site to your new site. What kind of sources are both of these sites representing? Hopefully they're representing the same types of sources. Also, of course, any parallel monitoring information. Information about nearby monitors can also be helpful. So all of that can be very useful. Okay, so Gail and I have been talking about sort of your big, broad network modifications. As was mentioned yesterday, the big picture is, of course, important, but the little site details are also important. As Joel mentioned this morning, there's detailed site information tables that are included in your annual monitoring network plans, and those include all of that detail, as Meredith said, that network plans need to show that you're meeting Part 58 and appendices A, C, D, and E. So it's a whole bunch of information, and seems sort of excessive, but there's reasons for it. So just to quickly let you know, if you haven't ever seen a detailed site information table, oftentimes for each site, it'll start off with a little narrative paragraph at the beginning that'll tell you the overall purpose of your station. Why was it first established there? What's it meant to characterize? What does the data show? Have you had like a continuing downward trend, which is what we like to see, or have you actually shown exceedances at this particular site over the past couple of years? Also, other uses of this data or any sources of interest that your certain station might be characterizing. And then, this is the detailed site information table. So it's a whole bunch of information, and we'll zoom in. So at the top, you have your basic station information, including your site name, your AQS ID, and then you have actual specific information for each of your monitors. So you'll have distance to the roadways, the monitor types, the spatial scale that you're representing. And then as we move down the table, it talks about things like your distances, your distance from your probe to your nearest tree, your distance to structures, as well as things such as flow rate verifications, frequency of 1-point QC checks if you have gaseous instruments, and that type of information. So this all is a lot, right? And might seem kind of excessive. But in addition to being able to show that you're meeting your requirements, it's important because really all of this information impacts the data that you're collecting, right? So, for example, your distance to the roadways coupled with your traffic count. As has been mentioned before, a lot of times roadways will increase in traffic count over the years. And if you look at this, 10 years down the road, you might see, oh my gosh, the traffic count has actually increased to such an extent that our PM monitor is now actually close to a really, really high traffic count roadway. And maybe we shouldn't be neighborhood scale anymore. Maybe we're actually middle scale. Another thing, like co-location, distance between co-located monitors. Why might that be important to know? There are federal regulations. Excellent, very true. What are some other reasons? How might it impact your data if you're too close? So you could actually have exhaust from one of your instruments impacting your other one, right? So maybe if you're too close, your one instrument could actually be measuring the exhaust as opposed to actually the ambient air. So those are things that you want to think about as well. One more example, distance to trees. We all have such fondness for trees. Yeah, we always think it's ironic when EPA is like, your tree is too close, you need to cut it down. But why is distance to trees important? Why do we keep harping on this? Say you have an ozone monitor. Why would you care about distance to trees? Scavenging, excellent, right. If you have a tree that's really close, it might actually be decreasing your ozone concentrations. Same could be true of particulate. It could be actually, catching some of the particulate, and instead of impacting the monitor, it's just getting caught on your trees. So those are important things to keep in mind. And also, that's why it's in your annual monitoring network plans. So just quickly, if you're thinking about moving, say, an ozone probe, what site elements that are listed here might you consider revisiting? Jaime says all of them. Right. Yeah, so your probe height, certainly all of your distances, if you're moving that probe. Residence time, that's a great one. Yes. And then on the rest of your table, what else might you want to consider? Distance to roadways, right? Spatial scale. Beautiful. Excellent. Address, yeah, it could impact your address if you're actually moving from one building to another. Great. So really, all this to say, the site operators, you are the eyes and the ears. You know what's actually going on at your sites. Please make sure that you're documenting things, communicating to folks if you're seeing changes. There's oftentimes new construction. We are in California, increased traffic, new emission sources or growing trees. All of that is important, to just sort of remind yourself to think about and check every once in a while as you're going out to your sites. So in summary, communicate. Talk to us. Feel free to contact Patrick or your PQAO liaisons that are actually listed in your handout as well as in the information presented yesterday. And work with ARB to discuss possible implications of any network modifications before you actually implement those changes. And then finally, some of the documents that were shown yesterday by Carissa, EPA handbooks, CFR, good references. And with that, any questions? Yes, can we get a mic?
Hello, I'm Chris with the Bay Area Air Quality District. Sometimes we have trouble obtaining current traffic counts, and the most current we can get is like 5 years old or 10 years old. I mean, what does the EPA consider as being up to date? Yeah,
that's a great point. So we like to see whatever your most current information is. Honestly, we understand that it can be difficult to get your official numbers updated. Also, there's a number of different sources of data sometimes. So whatever you feel like is accurate and the most recent is fantastic. Also, if you have tried to get more recent information and are unable to, you might just enter that as like a one-sentence thing in your annual monitoring network plan so that folks can know, this is the most recent data available.
Gwen?
Yeah.
What if parallel monitoring isn't possible when you're moving a site? I mean, you get booted out of a lease,
right? And
then it's sometimes really difficult to conduct that.
Yes.
So how do you proceed from there?
Talk to ARB and EPA, and sometimes there's some statistical kinds of things we can do. That's certainly oftentimes the case. Hopefully you get notice early enough, and then you find your news site and you're able to do parallel monitoring. But I mean, it's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah. But we'll certainly work with you to figure out ways to address that.
Morning, Gwen. I had a question also.
Hey, Earl.
You had mentioned when you talked about getting EPA ARB approval before you shut down a site, especially a design value site. You had mentioned also SPM sites. Mm-hmm. I wanted to clarify, though, because SPMs are 2 years, 24 months before they become a SLAM site, and to do a design value, you need 3 years' worth of data. Mm-hmm. SPMs are purposefully trying to get an understanding before they become a SLAM site I mean, it seems contradictory to have to get an excuse or approval to shut it down if you're only there to special purpose monitor.
Right, right. So that's a good point. So if you only have 2 years of data and it's a special purpose monitor, then, I think that that's a different situation. Sometimes people actually maintain a monitoring site as a special purpose monitor past that 2 years. So in those cases, while we encourage you to consider whether or not it's more appropriate for that site to be a SLAMS, if it is still a special purpose monitor and it's your highest design value site, which is not an ideal situation, but if that case should occur, then what I said would apply. Okay. Yes.
Regarding the shutdown, you need 5 years of DVs. What happens if you have an invalid year of DV? Do the DVs have to be consecutive, or could it be like, one DV is valid, a year skip, and then you have 4 valid DV after? And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you have incomplete data to affect the DV, and that year becomes invalid. Mm-hmm. So does it have to be consecutive or not?
We would like it to be consecutive, yes. but if you don't have that, again, talk to folks, and we'll see if there's some kind of statistical workaround kind of thing. Yeah, I know. With all of these things, things happen. We understand. The real world intercedes, and then you're faced with the less than ideal situation. So certainly we understand that, and we can work with you. Yeah.
Good morning, Gwen.
Good morning.
You guys have talked about trees a lot. Moving a tree is not an easy thing to do when you don't own the site.
Right.
A lot of people are attached to their trees. Has EPA ever done a study where they put an ozone monitor 9 meters from the drip line and then stuck one 11 meters from the drip line to see if it makes a difference?
Do you want to answer, Kate? Perhaps while Kate is getting a microphone, one thing about that, and this doesn't directly answer your question, but one thing that we've seen people do is say, this tree is this far from our probe, but it's not in our predominant wind direction, and we have more than 270 degrees of unrestricted airflow. So that's one way of addressing that. And then, Kate, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing, and there have been studies that have been done to learn more about scavenging, both from trees and surfaces. And depending on your situation and predominant flow and even the type of tree and what kind of surface area that has and what your other surrounding area looks like, your specific situation is very case by case. So if you think you have a problem, just talk to us about it, and we can evaluate whether we think, based on the other cases that we've seen, whether it's actually affecting your data or not.
Yeah, we've had situations where there's like a palm tree, but really it's, the trunk that's within 10 meters, and usually that's fine. We like to know about it, but, you don't really need to do anything about it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so very much.
I have one more point I'd like to make along the lines of coordination and collaboration. It was mentioned earlier that a lot of districts are moving from FRMs to FEMs. And I'd like to recognize a couple districts that submitted packages to my shop for evaluation, which made our job very easy and seamless. And that's Ventura County and Northern Sonoma. So if anyone is considering moving from FRMs to FEMs, and in Ventura's case, they moved their entire network. They did away with their PM laboratory and had 2 years of data comparisons that they'd done, some parallel monitoring. So work with these folks. They submitted a package. They know the information that was useful to us, and in a turnaround time, we evaluated the report and made a recommendation to move forward within a couple weeks. So just wanted to throw that out there in terms of collaboration. If you have questions or comments, to reach out to those folks.
Great. Thanks.